نسل به داغستان میشنده دست ایجاد خواهد. Enemy machine gun nest on your right flank, destroy.
The few, the proud, the Navajo code talkers, triumphant through an unbreakable code. The World War II Navajo code talkers triumphed in the battlegrounds of the Pacific Theater using an unbreakable code for marine transmissions which was derived from their native Navajo language and culture. Overcoming many tragedies, these Navajo Marines proudly served their country by using their language as a secret weapon, thus playing a pivotal role in defeating the Japanese and saving countless American military lives. With their work remaining classified until 1968, the Navajo code talkers were denied recognition for almost a quarter of a century. Another 30 years would then pass before they were finally awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. So what exactly are code talkers? Code talkers are military people who use a secret language for secure communications. Their use of a secret code is not new. In the 5th century BC, a code on a wax-covered tablet saved the Greek civilization from impending defeat. Cryptograms, where each letter stands for another, were also used for centuries, until frequency charts helped crack them. In World War I, Americans tried to use Native American languages for their telephone code squads. It ultimately failed due to a lack of military terminology within the tribal languages and a lack of Native American recruits. The need for an unbreakable code became imperative after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941. A war analyst noted that military communications were made available to the enemy like sand sifting through a sieve. Rapid, secret communication was as important to any operation as ammunition. Since Germany knew that Native Americans were used in World War I, Nazis then posed as anthropologists in the 1930s and visited reservations in order to learn the languages. However, due to the Navajo's geographical isolation, they remained hidden. The Navajo Code Talker program was the idea of World War I veteran Philip Johnston. His parents were Navajo missionaries. Johnston learned to speak Trader Navajo at the age of 4, so he could play with the Navajo children. He believed that unless you learned their language from birth, fluency was near impossible. Decades later, Johnston had read about the military's need for secure communications. He then proposed his plan to the Marines. The Navajo language complexity and obscurity made it the perfect candidate for a secret code. A test occurred in February 1942. What took a machine 30 minutes only took the Navajos 20 seconds. Experts couldn't even crack the language itself. Officers immediately gave the approval for the recruitment of Navajos for the secret code project. The Marines then went looking for a few good men, fluent in English and Navajo. Since the U.S. government had always treated the Navajos unfairly, recruits could be hard to find. The 1848 Army occupation of their land, Colonel Kit Carson's bloody victory in 1864, and the forced Long Walk which drove the Navajos from their sacred lands nearly wiped out the Navajo population by 1868. Despite this tragic treatment, this generation of Navajos was able to set aside the bitterness and answer the call to serve. They wanted a way to escape current reservation conditions, with culture-killing boarding schools, mandatory sheep slaughter, no voting rights, and few jobs. Code talker Carl Gorman remembers, "It sounded like the worst that could happen was I'd have a roof over my head and be eating regular." So on May 4th, 1942, the original 29 Code Talker recruits boarded a bus to San Diego to become known as the 382nd Platoon of the U.S. Marine Corps. After boot camp, the task was now to develop the code. Because the Navajo language was only oral, they needed to construct a memorized alphabet for rapid transmission. What made the Navajo code so unbreakable was its tonal quality. If you changed the inflection or pronunciation, one word could have 4 meanings. They tackled the alphabet first using mostly animal names. 3 words for each letter would be created to minimize repetition. Combining the first letter of each word then spelled out a message. The words had been selected randomly, thus making the coded result a meaningless list of Navajo words. The next part entailed encoding 211 military terms. They relied on species-specific behaviors for these. With 400 words tested, the Marines felt they had the most highly mobile cryptographs, each with 2 arms, 2 legs, and an unbreakable code. For this great accomplishment, the Navajos were promised promotions. Unfortunately, those promises were broken. 15 code talkers soon shipped out to Guadalcanal in August 1942, with a request for another 83 more once officers experienced how efficient the code was in battle. Eventually, there would be over 200 code talkers deployed by 1943, with their ranks growing to almost 450 recruits. When they were first deployed, however, tragedy arose with their transmissions. American troops panicked when they heard the Navajo code and thought that the Japanese had taken over their radio communications. Moving forward, the Navajos then had to use the words New Mexico and Arizona before transmitting. The code eventually grew to 619 terms. It was described as an earful of strange noises, interspersed with sounds resembling a Tibetan monk prayer call, mixed with fast American double talk and the sound of a hot water bottle being emptied. The Japanese didn't think it was even human speech. Another tragedy that the Navajos encountered during battle was their resemblance to the Japanese enemy. Within days on Guadalcanal, fellow Marines were assigned as bodyguards to avoid mistaken identity by their own troops. These bodyguards were then also instructed to kill the code talker to protect the code in the case of capture. Some Marines thought the Navajos were more trouble than they were worth. Tragically, the Pacific theater would see some of the most ferocious World War II fighting. Since the battlefield was ocean and islands, the need to reliably transmit messages over long distances was crucial. The Navajos' biggest triumph was just being the simplest and fastest at message transmission. The code talkers helped to secure each strategic island as the Marines made their way through the Pacific. Marine Major Howard Conard proclaimed in early 1945, "Were it not for the Navajo, the Marines would have never taken Iwo Jima." 6 code talkers worked round the clock for 2 days, transmitting over 800 messages with no mistakes. During the Iwo Jima assault, the Marines tragically lost 6,000 men in 28 days, with 25,000 more injured. The loss would have been worse had it not been for the Navajo code talkers. Although the Navajo code talkers were triumphant in war, they experienced many hardships upon discharge. They were treated like their secret mission had never occurred, since the 642 code talker designation was not on their discharge papers. This designation would have helped them gain employment and compete with the white man for scarce jobs. Additional tragedies included more empty promises from the U.S. government. The Navajos were assured assistance from the GI Bill in the form of home loans. Unfortunately, banks refused to grant them since Navajos had reservation land parcels with no property titles. The GI Bill also guaranteed education money. However, there were no higher educational opportunities on the reservations, no job training programs in the Southwest, and no Veterans Administration health care on the reservations. Even federal offices denied them identity cards because they were told that they were not full citizens. However, the greatest tragedy that the Navajo code talkers had to endure was 23 years of no recognition for their invaluable service. Since their code was used again somewhat in the Korean and Vietnam conflicts, it was not declassified until 1968. Although President Nixon recognized these men with certificates in 1971, it would take our government another 30 years to award the Congressional Medal of Honor. In 2001, President George W. Bush presented gold medals to the original 29 and silver to all others. Tragically, only 5 of the original 29 were still alive. Despite the hardships they endured, the Navajo code talkers still managed to make social and economic impacts on their reservations. They implemented education reform, job training, small business loans, and tourism. When faced with more assimilation pressure from the U.S. government, they used their newfound confidence gained from being Marines to declare Navajo nationhood. They established bicultural schools, a community college, and a judiciary system. Another triumph came when their tribe leadership achieved self-determination. They also helped contribute to the escalation of the 1960s civil rights movement by weakening military racial barriers with their integrated service 20 years prior. Ironically, the code talkers' triumph in World War II was one final, undeserved blessing from the Navajo people who overcame countless tragedies at the hands of their own government. Without the Navajo code talkers, the ending of World War II may have been vastly different. A surviving code talker, Peter MacDonald, states, "What we did truly represents who we are as Americans. When our way of life is threatened, we come together as one, and when we come together as one, we are invincible."